Hey everybody, it's Brian with Enduro Bites here with Daniel Matheny, and we are broadcasting from the North Pole, or at least it feels like it. I'm here with Daniel today, and we're going to talk a little bit about training and some general concepts to help you get a better basis for what you're doing on the bike or run or whatever it may be you'd like to do.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, we wrote some things down up here on the whiteboard. Hopefully you can read. The main thing is like the principles that we're talking about of the little things being the big things. And there's so many ways we could kind of dive down into this, and we've been kind of putting some bullet points to some of this stuff, but trying to stay focused. Some of the ones we were focusing on was specifically, and Brian made a good kind of tagline on it is knowing your objective or there's no objective, and you can go into that a little bit more as we dive in.
Cool. Well, a lot of people, they have a training program and they have a coach sometimes, and it's all well and good, but then when they head out the door, the objective of their training for that day is not on their mind. They just end up getting caught up on Strava segments, racing up a hill against their buddy, or just grinding out miles and climbs or whatever it may be, and that training program they had just kind of goes out the window.
Yeah.
So too often.
Yeah, and it was kind of a joke because we had a big stack of product here, and one of the examples that will feed into one of the other points down here of earning your intensity, or even the second point of discrediting the correct intensity you're supposed to do, is I went out on a training ride myself from here at my office a few weeks ago and realized that I didn't have any of my normal stock of food, and got out on a long, notorious ride that a lot of us do from here around Hanover Loop, which is pretty lonely, and there's not much out there, and I didn't forgot any food in my pockets. And even though I had a goal, went out there without food, I obviously wasn't even able to hit my goal from that standpoint, but the intensity was like, I'm just going to go out and do a lower intensity kind of zone 2 aerobic ride, and intentionally knowing that I was going to start out paced and steady, and it was hard to do that towards the end because once you run out of fuel, it was like, oh man,
yes,
just hitting the wall. So the knowing your objective, this is something I work a lot with athletes, and sometimes I'll put in a little placeholder in the front week of their workout that's, maybe it's try to hit a certain time duration over the course of the week, like 90 minutes of this goal intensity for the week. That way they can know, like, even if I need to check off a day on a different one, or if I wake up feeling like crap, they can do that and have the autonomy to move it, and then they're still knowing that I'm still hitting my goal. And if they don't, then that's when we kind of go back and look of like, why did we reach the edge, which is okay. Maybe that's to the point where we're trying to get an overload point, but overload may have been 70 minutes of intensity at that point based on the amount of fatigue they've accumulated.
Do you ever have go the opposite direction and have the goal be more recovery based?
Definitely. Sometimes it's, if they maybe not necessarily recovery based, like say a limitation of how much they do, like don't go over this.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the phase, there's an accumulation of a certain intensity. There's an accumulation of a certain time. Maybe it's even not accumulating enough time. Like, don't go over this amount, because there's people that are notorious for doing more on their recovery days than they should. Or if they have a complete off day of scheduling something in, it's like, why? Like, do you really need this extra day? And if it is, then let's talk about it. Maybe we need more on the other days to create that overload. Or
to me, that ties in a lot with earning your intensity.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this was the last, but you can see there's just this like little endless cycle. And earn your intensity we talked about it sounds almost like you're talking about the intensity like going hard, and that's not necessarily the intensity that I was referencing, because it portrays and relates to all your training cycles. Like, it's recovery days, you got to earn them. It's your aerobic days, you got to earn them. You've got to earn your intensity days as far as like even the intervals and the high intensity work and races, because if you don't have the aerobic foundation, then even if you go out and do a ton of intensity or quality work, that house is going to come crumbling down at some point, because it's kind of fast gains and fast loss. Like, you can only sustain so much if you don't have that base. So, and one you talked about was recovery. Like, when do you feel like you've earned your recovery rides, or do you do recovery rides?
Often we've talked. I often won't do recovery rides because it's with my work schedule. It's often it creates more stress trying to do a recovery ride. If I was on a vacation and I had all day and the weather was ideal.
If you were perfect, like pro athlete.
In a perfect world, yeah, in a perfect climate, recovery rides to go get some coffee or whatever it might be would be awesome. But those recovery days, sometimes it's less stress,
Yeah.
not even having to think about, I'm just not going to get caught up on email or write an article or work on product development, as opposed to sometimes trying to cram in a recovery ride is more stressful. It becomes something other than a recovery ride.
Yeah, and that's a huge piece, because so many people, like I work a lot with some young elite, junior elite athletes, but a majority of people are masters, like business people, because I run my business. I have 2 kids at home. Juggle that. You run your business and all kinds of things going on, and some people think, oh, I've got to do this recovery ride. But whenever it comes to recovery, what's recovery? It's supposed to be a reduction in stress, right? And if it is more stressful to try to get suited up for your ride, your run, whatever it may be, that you're just pulling your own hair out to get out for a recovery ride, is it really recovery?
Yeah.
You might as well just like
it's not facilitating
Yeah.
recovery.
Yeah.
It's taking resources away,
Yeah.
as well as opposed to stimulating blood flow,
Yeah.
getting some sunshine, taking stress away.
There is a point sometimes whenever, if you can just get out the door, then it turns into that stress relief. I'm that type of person where I'm kind of, the frequency of that riding, I commute to work all the time, it's not an extra a pull of my arm to do that. And so sometimes people need that of just like, I've just got to get out and shut down the email that I need to check, or shut down the product development, or whatever it may be, because you need your own personal bubble. And for me, that's a little bit of my, mental sanity, is getting out. And I don't even necessarily call it a recovery ride sometimes, because it's like, it's just getting out to get out. Maybe it's recovery, maybe it turns into an aerobic ride or whatever it may be. But I know, like, my objective is sometimes free form. Like, and that's okay. You don't have to have an objective of, I'm going to go crush intervals today. Sometimes it could just be, my objective is just to go get some fresh air, enjoy the sunshine, whatever it may be. Like, obviously we're getting pummeled by snow right now, so it's like, if somebody's recovery ride is on the schedule for right now, it's like, if they blow that off, am I going to be like, bad, you didn't do your recovery ride? I'd be like, no, like, it's probably better that you, just didn't try to hook up your trainer and fool with that, getting it set up for the year, or trying to ride in the snow. Like, it's better just to recoup.
Just chill.
Yeah, just chill for it. So take the whole stress as an accumulation, because, like, I've got all kinds of data on Training Peaks and WKO and all that stuff, and it's like, I can only track whatever training they do of that 1, 2, 3, 4 hours of that given day, and there's so much more outside of that 24-hour period that is, I don't even have access to. Like, I can't track their stress from work, or their stress from kids, or how much sleep they got. It's getting better with some data stuff, but from wearables, but it's still not everybody using them. So, yeah.
And I find that this time of year, myself right now, and some other people I know, sometimes if cycling is your main sport, and I'm doing a lot more off the bike training now. It's nice just not to have to think about riding the bike. I mean, to force yourself to ride the bike. I have plenty of friends in warm weather climates, and they're doing ridiculous training miles and hours year round. But actually, I think it's good. Sometimes the weather or life forces you to make some changes and keep things fresh, and let you kind of refocus your objectives.
Yeah, and that's kind of like one thing I want to like give to our listeners is some like take home pieces and those applications, because if we go through that kind of earn the intensity kind of standpoint, like, let's try to give them some pieces of like, how do you make sure you earn your recovery, or how do you earn your intensity? So we can do that now or come back to it, but also that kind of concept of when you do live in a warmer climate, or you have access to like year-round riding, or year-round good conditions, is it necessarily the best thing from a coach standpoint? Sometimes not. Like, I've seen athletes that shut things down at a certain point in the year because we live in this climate, and ski, do some skimo stuff, or even just ski, downhill stuff, or they snowshoe, whatever it may be. And there's people that are worried about losing their fitness that try to maintain their training all year, and they never really have a dip in fitness to where then they can recover.
Yeah, to reach that peak, you need to have a valley.
Yeah, and so that kind of segues into like the aerobic piece of earning it. Is sometimes those days are, it segues into both of those, of discrediting the correct intensity of aerobic work, and because it's called long, slow distance, or slow, easy miles or whatever it may be. And just because it's termed that, people discredit, like, I'm not going to do that work so much because I can go race on Zwift, or I can go kill a Strava KOM or something. So it's like, when you earn those days of aerobic work is whenever it's maintaining what you have, but it's not accumulating more fatigue. So there's reasons why during the off season, you can ride aerobically or do some other sports, like, you and I were talking about running. Like, it's not like I'm going out and doing intervals running right now. It's just, it's colder weather and I go out and run with the dog or something like that. It's just a change of seasons. So other people do the same thing with hiking, snowshoeing, SEMO, stuff like that, and it just balances out.
I have some very good friends up in Summit County, and they barely touch their bikes in the winter. Early season, they're not lighting the world on fire, but become, get to July, August, they're crushing it, and they're not just at that same training threshold year in, year out, month by month, because they're forced to do other things that they definitely reach higher peaks.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. I agree.
Yeah, and it's like the take home for the recovery is it kind of goes back around the circle a little bit to the intensity. Like, people are like, oh, I'm taking a recovery day. I'm like, did you really deserve the recovery day? And it's not a matter of deserving it. It's a matter of did you do the adequate intensity in your schedule to deserve the recovery day? Because sometimes there's certain people that I call it kind of like people that have gears in their gearbox. Like, the more fit you are, the higher kind of absolute intensity you can go. So then if you want to go do a recovery ride, you have more room under that ceiling to do it. Where some people, just to do a recovery ride out on the road is almost impossible unless they have a closed course or a completely flat bike path
because
through
the
town.
intensity just to ride up a hill, as easy as their gearing allows, exceeds what you'd want them to do on that recovery day.
So the recovery rides, and going kind of continue to circle back around to these points, is knowing your objective. Because if that's the thing, and it's you want to do a recovery ride because everybody's all the hype of recovery tactics and stuff like that, it's then you have to be able to do that. So the people that aren't fit enough, you have to be fit enough before you can actually do true recovery, because otherwise you're going to go out and it's going to end up skirting into the zone 2 aerobic ride, which isn't necessarily bad, but if you really smoke yourself on a hard day, then that easy day isn't going to really be easy. And then what happens when you get into that cycle of easy not being easy, hard's not hard anymore. So then you're
never fully recovered enough to really put in the supermax effort to do that. And going back to the recovery days, I've ridden with so many people where they don't really understand if it is a recovery day, how easy to go. I mean, they're maybe backing off 5 watts. It's just no, you just need to chill. We're just out here to literally spin our legs. You're really not putting much force against the pedals. Just enjoy the sunshine, some conversation. It's to facilitate recovery. It's to help you get over that last hard workout or series of hard workouts, as opposed to going slightly easier than you might go on your other days.
And so for certain people, it's those recovery days are completely off, or some other type of activity, just like walking or doing whatever. Because the typical, I speak with a lot of cyclists, but I still coach runners and triathletes and some paddlers and stuff like that. But typically we all have, a certain plane of motion we move in that's pretty prominent to our primary sport. And so doing something different than that is actually ideal. And even sitting in desk, doing computer work, a lot of times we don't walk enough. So it's I found personally, and even people that I coach that started tracking stuff on their, Apple Watches or fitness trackers, the people that were walking more became more resilient. And that was even on the same days they were training or things like that. And it kind of goes against one of the kind of, age-old sayings of if you're not on your bike, then you should be sitting down. If you're sitting down, then you should be lying down. If you're lying down, you should be sleeping. And it's almost like this nuance of cyclists or athletes are lazy. And it's realistically, you can develop some of that resilience by just moving. I found personally my performance went up when I, got another dog in the house, because then the responsibility of I need to walk the dog. He's a crazy, puppy that needs some work. So it was I felt better because I was moving both in the morning and evening when I needed to take him out. And it was simple things like that people don't quantify as training, but still go into the effect of it's movement, and we're humans made to move.
It's on one hand you do more walking with the dog, you're building more capacity at a low level. Versus if you're in the middle of a stage race, if you're doing the Breck Epic, if you're sitting down, you should be lying down. If you're lying down, you should be sleeping. There's times to really where you need to channel all of your energies, all your resources into performance, whether it's a training block or a race. And probably more often than not, though, you want to work on increasing work capacity.
Yeah.
So being lazy isn't necessarily ideal.
Yeah. And kind of with that, it's like, there's specific times where, if you're in a Breck Epic stage race or a road stage race or a very hard training cycle of your year, then you got to do extra things to get that rejuvenation. Ultimately, I haven't seen any times whenever even some of those like things that our bodies are made to do have pulled away from that, unless it's extreme. Like if it's like
Pikes Peak.
or something like the everyday Joe that goes out and they spend several hours in a race expo or something out in the heat the day before the event, and they're not taking care of themselves, because that goes back into the other, little things that high performers do. It's like they have to do with sponsor things sometimes, and they're out in the venues more than even some of the amateurs, but they still perform. But it's because they probably take care of their hydration, they have a plan, they know their objective, nutrition, all that stuff. It's like they're taking care of those little things, where the amateurs are the ones that forget those little things. They do all of it, and it compounds. Like one thing by itself isn't going to probably throw you off, but all of it, it does. Like
not enough sleep, not ideal nutrition, not properly hydrated.
It's probably like they spend hours in the venue and then they get back and they don't know what they're going to eat, and it's like, I got to run to the store,
have a few beers,
take some free product that they don't know what it does to them. The next thing you know, they don't sleep, or who knows. So all those things kind of go in, but it's going to the the recovery. Like you have to go hard enough on the intensity to earn the easy. Aerobic days, you kind of you have to work your way through the season to earn steady work, I think. So it depends on like the context. If it's into the season, then that steady aerobic work is basically building you back up for later. So you're earning it from that standpoint. Like I've already done all the hard work. I've already reached a high form level. So then I can be okay with coming back down and being like, I don't need to go out and race my friends. I don't need to go search KOMs. I don't need to go like race on Zwift all winter. Like I've earned the fact that I can go steady, and that is considered maintenance work. And frankly, what it does for a lot of us, because we're the type of persons where it's like we can't take those extra days off or whatever it may be, is it's a filler from that standpoint to keep them from doing extra hard work as well. And I found that it's like if you give somebody enough work that keeps them from doing something they're not supposed to, it's a little bit of like just
they have an emotional or need to be on their bikes or run or whatever it may be, but you don't want them trying to hit PRs every time, so you're prescribing something less than that. That's interesting. I feel like, based off one of our recent conversations, that I got focused on doing the really high intensity work and then the recovery work in the last few months. So here maybe in the last several weeks, actually is when we went to Moab, it's just like it dawned on me that I feel like I've earned some long slow distance, if you want to call it that.
I've tried to find another term to like get away from using that, because it just it sets in people's heads of like LSD or long slow distance, and it's like it is that, but it's like the concept of zone 2 low intensity, like polarized training, whatever it may be, it's not really that slow. Last year whenever I was doing some of the stuff, even with like the beta red and doing it with the MCT oil and basically fasting in the morning and just basically serving as a lab rat, because so much of that stuff is going around that I have to understand what it's doing personally as well as for athletes, because they want to try some of this stuff. But I did several months of that, and it was, once you see the gains of it, it's not slow. Like I found that I was going out at first and it was a struggle, because I had surgery, had a hernia repair, and it was like jumped in and it was like, oh man, I know what I used to be capable of, like correlating that power to heart rate, and all of a sudden my heart rate's really high for a given power. So then objectively it's like, I can't do that power anymore. I know the physiological strain is too much. I need to bring that back down. And so that's something that athletes have a hard time doing sometimes, is like they know what they used to be able to do, or their FTP or something, and then they try to hit that, and then they're constantly physiologically their heart rate is higher than it should be, so they're gaining extra fatigue, and it just takes them longer to get back to where they want to be. But from knowing what I know and being okay with that, it's like, okay, I'm going to dial down, go to where I need to be heart rate wise. And then after a few weeks, it clicked. It was like, oh, now I'm starting to see the gains. Like what used to be 175 watts at 130 beats per minute was 200, 215. And it got to a point where after doing hardly no intensity, no specific intensity, I guess, there were some days where I'd go out and it would be natural, but it was not like I'm doing intervals. It was like, oh, I can go out and ride 240 watts and still keep my heart rate at an aerobic zone. And usually like that's a span of 60, 70 watt change over the course of, 6 to 10 weeks. And it was like, oh, okay. And then still working with teams, and I go out and do some field testing efforts with the junior teams, and it's like, okay, going up these climbs out here, and it's like I haven't done any of that stuff, and it's like the next 3 times I was forced to go and field test with these kids, it was like new peak 20, new peak 20, new peak 20. And I think that's where it's like earned the fact of stacking that intensity onto the foundation, because all of that was basically I earned the aerobic efficiency or earned the training volume, and then basically when I had that intensity stack on top of it, it's like, okay, the body's ready to handle it. So you kind of got to do that foundation work to stack intensity.
What's interesting here is a little bit of a sidebar, but to ride the mountain bike, it's tough to do any of our rides in Zone 2
Sure.
with our trails.
Yeah.
So it's like it's going to be a mountain bike ride, and it's going to be on the fun trails in Cheyenne Canyon or anywhere on the west side. You have to allow or realize that that's going to be a high intensity workout. It may not be an interval workout, but it's going to be. It could potentially be, depending who you're riding with and trying to keep up with.
But that's what I mentioned the other day when we chatted too. Is like at the end of that phase, personally, when I got to that point, I raised my ceiling enough to where I had enough gears to where mountain bike rides then became where I could go out and do aerobic, like Zone 2 rides. Like I was doing 2-3 hour mountain bike rides, keeping the heart rate, even climbing some of the steepest stuff out there, and even not with Eagle, like just an 11 speed one by, and it was like keeping my heart rate below 140. And for me, everybody's heart rate's completely unique, but for me that is like kind of the top of my aerobic zone, and so I could keep it there, and usually it was well within that range. And I was like, oh, I'm able to climb, and it's unique because even some exercise prescription I started giving athletes that followed that same intensity spectrum of like do the work first and build up your aerobic engine to where it's robust. Some of the prescriptions were go out and start adding in some of that intensity before your heart rate pops the upper end of that aerobic threshold, or that kind of like level 1 respiratory point. So from that standpoint, it was go out and do some tempo based on your power. Go out and do some threshold. Go out and even do some short VO2 max. But because they were, say, starting at, say, 125, 130 beats, still at a good power output, then they could hit a certain section and their power go up. But then by the time they would get over that certain section, the heart rate wouldn't bust that ceiling. Not necessarily is it bad that it busts that ceiling, but essentially just so they don't make it a tempo ride. Say shut it down at a certain point and their heart rate would tack and then come back down within range, and they're still getting intermittent power output that is quality, but they're still keeping it within the physiological function of the heart rate. And it's very dynamic of talking somebody through that, but it's like, it's basically revving your car up, but before it starts to get all hot and bothered about it. So
do you for people who don't have power meter or aren't tracking heart rate, is there an easy way to kind of know that you're staying in Zone 2?
That's where I think triangulating those kind of things, if you have them, because if you don't have power, it's hard to know what you're objectively doing.
Sure.
Like for me, I prescribe all Zone 2 and Zone 1 work, like recovery and aerobic, by heart rate. So I try to keep it relatively low, and so that way physiologically, if you start out at a certain level, then if you start out with power on some of that stuff, then you're going to go too high because the power starts here and then the heart rate drifts as you fatigue a little bit. But it's kind of giving them some tools or showing them some graphics. Like I'll usually send them some file analysis of other people that says like, this is what I see in like an interval workout. Here's 3x10 or 2x20, and this is what it typically looks like for somebody that's at this level of training. And a lot of times if they start at the right power, the heart rate is below where you think it is, and then it goes through, and then I try to talk them through like the the feedback that the body's giving you, as far as like your breathing rate, how many words you can say, and that's a perceived effort because I've seen.
Well, what would that be? Like, so someone that doesn't
But
say
what
someone.
intensity? Because it's obviously
Well, like
different.
zone, like if you want to stay aerobic.
Okay. Well, one thing. So starting recovery. One thing earlier you said was like, it's easy. So it's like going out. I call that one is basically just enough pressure to move yourself, but not to kind of like if you were riding next to somebody, it would almost be like trying to reverse half wheel them on the road. Like
Yeah.
it'd almost be like trying to be that guy. Like I'm going to slow you down.
Yeah, I think like soft pedaling.
Yeah, soft pedaling, that stuff, and I don't necessarily want coasting per se, because then you're not really doing work.
Yeah.
And if it goes too long, then it's not a recovery ride. Like it's just enough work to kind of flush things out. And a lot of times I'll use them in a hard training cycle of an opportunity to encourage hydration, even sometimes do a little drink mix or some food, because then it's like they can, open up those energy pathways and compensate and get ready for the next day. The aerobic stuff, that is one of those where at first it feels too easy. And then if you do it long enough, which that's kind of the goal of aerobic work, then you start to get to the point where it's like, ooh, you get this, it's like a slow, I call it a slow burn, I guess. Like, everybody's endurance to that aerobic point at a certain place is a little bit different. So it's like when I did that ride a few weeks ago, my endurance had dropped farther than I thought, but it's like an hour and 45 minutes in, I started feeling sensations like a little bit heavy, a little bit sore, I guess, in the legs, but breathing rate was controlled. I could have talked to people, that kind of stuff. So that's what it is. It's like you could talk in almost like complete sentences to somebody.
Have a conversation.
It's not super, you're not like gasping for breath. The tempo is like where a lot of people gravitate. And so, training zones, that may be another article or like basically another kind of like recording, but essentially like that's just a name to quantify what we're seeing or the response we're trying to get from physiology. So it's like recovery, aerobic, tempo, whatever you want to call them. That's just what we're using. But essentially, like as you go up in intensity, tempo, you start getting to that a little bit more rapid breathing. But there's obviously low tempo, high tempo. It's a range for a reason. But essentially, you start getting a little bit more rapid. Your words, sentences, conversation, maybe it's a little bit more shortened. Some people use a 10-point RPE scale. Like if it's 1 to 10, that's where anything like 1 to 3 to 4 is kind of just resting to walking. Once you start getting 5 to 6, it's more like the aerobic work. Once you get to like 6 to 7, it's somewhere in that kind of tempo range. Once you get up to like 7 to 8, it's more of threshold, something you could sustain like a true hour of power. And then 9 out of 10 is usually super threshold VO2 max, and then like 10 out of 10 is basically full gas efforts, like anaerobic capacity, sprints, anything like that, even the high intensity interval work that people do, like Tabatas and stuff like that. And I even say that because there's, talking people through that is like there's more than one way to get to max, right? It's like if I tell you to go climb a 20-minute climb and go full gas to do your best, by the end you're going to be at max. But it's still a mostly, 95%, 90% aerobic effort. But if I say go like a dog's chasing you, that's a max effort too.
Yeah.
So it's putting those parameters around what you have. So as you go up the intensity spectrum, like as you start to get to threshold, that's whenever I consider it like you have to have some focus. Like if you have a power meter, that's when you're actually checking a little bit more frequently, but you can have like rolling tempo, stuff like that. Like it's a pressure that most people like to ride at because it's that, just got some good feelings. I feel like I'm kind of going fast. The endorphins are rolling. Like that's what most people gravitate to. But it's also the spot where it's you kind of lose once you maximize that training effect. You kind of lose the benefit.
They feel like they're doing work that's not that uncomfortable.
Yeah,
it's getting up into that really uncomfortable where you start to really see the bigger changes. But
sure.
that has to be done in moderation.
Yeah. Like what would you say were some characteristics of like the last example that we gave, like of doing the one-on-one ops? Like
how I feel?
Yeah, how you felt. What would you describe it?
Well, the early ones, the early efforts would be controlled. I wasn't in just how I've learned my body is, don't put so much pressure to make your first efforts perfect.
Yeah.
Get up there in the zone that you should be in. Somewhere near there, do it, and then second, third one, is kind of when they would start to be where they should be.
Second, third rep?
Yeah,
Or set?
yeah. No rep.
Okay.
How it would be uncomfortable. It's kind of like, especially at the end of a set, say, I can't remember what I was doing, 8 or 10 efforts. I think it was 8. The last few, you're struggling to maintain it, to maintain
and that's where
that intensity.
having a power meter sometimes is a good carrot, because then you're like, oh man, I need to hit this. And then at first you almost need something like that to control it, because when you go out of the gate, you're fresh, you're able to just pin it. And that's the thing, a lot of times whenever I see people, say like, don't pay attention to the power, it is a negative slant of output. Like, output goes down, subjective heart rate goes up, and the perceived effort goes up. And that's one of those things where then if you have some pacing, you should take kind of Brian's feedback on that, is like, if you're doing that intermittent style work, the start on a lot of these efforts, like if you go and do a long threshold climb at the right pace, it's what I consider like a negative split. It shouldn't feel hard in the first quarter of a 20-minute effort. Like, you're going to get up to a working level for sure, but if you're doing it right in a repeatable method, I'm not talking about a max, hill climb TT or a field test or something, but it's like, if you're doing something for repeatability, I would rather athletes go slower. I don't care if you're riding at 102% of your threshold. I'd rather you ride at 90% and be able to do it 3 times versus like go out the first one and be like, oh, crush that. And then the next one is like 20 watts lower and the next one's 28 watts lower. It's like, okay, so you got less time at the right intensity, but you primed the pump by going super hard the first one, and then you just felt fatigued. And that's what a lot of people do, is like they feel crushed and they want to come home and like crush myself. And it's like, that's not always the way. It's like, you want to negative split it and almost, hit it hard towards the end.
I couldn't do these workouts, at least not effectively, without having power as a pacing mechanism, and 2 as a carrot at the right time. So I'm not trying to sell power meters, but it makes a world of difference for me.
Oh, it's huge.
Just going on heart rate, or there's a lot of ways I think that people can make themselves feel like they're doing a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
They can be exerting themselves, but with a power meter, you're seeing, okay, I'm exerting but am I exerting myself in a way that's putting more power on the pedals?
Yeah.
As opposed to like doing the start of a mountain bike race. I think you mentioned to me once, it's just like, you bury yourself, but you can't maintain that very long. And if you try to maintain that, you're having a negative slope again.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like having the correct perception to know when to pull the reins back a little bit, is because power for some I've seen, especially when I first started working with mountain bike power meters and athletes, was more about like just awareness. Like, you have the capacity to crush it, but don't, like, because you're in a stage race or you're an ultra race, like, why are you putting out your peak 5-minute power to start, trying to hang with the group that you're not even racing with or whatever it is, and then they're smoked and everything feels hard after that. So it's the same thing in like doing workouts and knowing your objective. If you go out and at least you've done enough work or self-awareness of like, well, what do I need to do right now? It's like, and being okay with where you're at in that moment. Maybe that's, I've got all kinds of notes, and as I'm thinking off, it's like these are all little things that people do correctly, of like being okay with where you're at right now. And that's like some athletes that are, doing that is kind of the key, because if you go out and try to train at a level that's 10% or 5% above where you're at, you're just going to be fatigued more than necessary, versus doing the right work, having the right sensations, everything lining up with heart rate, perceived effort, all that stuff, getting to the point where then you can have a recovery day, have an aerobic day, earn that from doing the intensity, coming back around, and then being able to repeat that workout or load up, because it's not all about just one workout or one quality day. It's all about the accumulation of chronic training load. Like, high performers do the great things, repeatability over and over and over, and that's all the little things. Like, big things occur from little things done well.
Yeah.
It's kind of get irked on some of the like media, but it's like aero helmets or these new things are going to gain you a certain percentage, but it's like if you added them all up, you'd be an Olympian. Like, you'd be 10% faster. So it's not really the case.
Yeah.
But it's all the little things that you do.
You mean bikes don't get 7% faster every year?
I wish. As we get older, that would just reduce the amount that we're losing each year. So maybe that's what we need. Yeah.
I'm all for it. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been awesome.
Yeah.
I love the concept. Little things are the big things, and I think hopefully this has been a help to everybody else. It's been a help to me.
Yeah. And if you guys want to see something a little bit more, questions or specifics, maybe I'll even try to post like a file analysis of what I was talking about as far as the kind of the heart rate drift for the power output and things like that, and then put some pieces to it as far as like what you're feeling, as far as the awareness and the perceived effort. Because even though we talked about all these things, you don't have to have all these gadgets to get faster. You just have to have that awareness. And I've seen some great athletes that have all the tools that when they go out, then they shut down, and that's not what you want either. So it's like having that self-awareness is good, but all these things are just, whenever there's so many things you can do with training and technology and all that stuff, when you come back down to it, like things we were talking about are just the fundamentals.
Yeah.
All these little things that,
Well, and I think posting that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it. So.
Yeah, like a little dynamic analysis of
Yeah.
workouts. So that'd be good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
I hope it stops snowing soon.
Yeah, I would like to get back out on the bike. Hopefully I get a new mountain bike soon, so it'll be in the cards when it does. So
Awesome. Look forward to it.
yeah, thanks again.
Cool. Till next time, everybody.